In today's video we are looking at moss poles and support stakes and deciding the difference between the two and going through which one is correct for you. I'll also be answering some really common questions that get asked regarding moss poles, so stay tuned and we'll go through it all. So what type of plants are going to enjoy a moss pole? Well, typically your Monsteras, your Philodendrons, your Epipriniums and some Anthuriums. Anything that would be considered epiphyte or semi-epiphyte. I think that's the correct pronunciation. So what are epiphytes and semi-epiphytes? Well, epiphytes tend to be stuff that grow in something that is not a soil mix. So you are looking at something like a staghorn fern, which would grow in a tree. Semi-epiphytes, on the other hand, are stuff that start their journey in soil and then would use some sort of structure to climb up, and it has aerial roots that it can then anchor to that structure, allowing its continued growth skyward. Okay, let's start off with the first question to answer. What's the main differences between a moss pole and a support stake? Well, apart from a moss pole typically being filled with moss, but you can fill it with other substrates like your own soil mix or coconut husks. A support stake is just that. It is a stake to support your plant, whether it be a bamboo cane, a big wooden stake, or a coconut husk wrapped PVC pipe. All it's there for doing is just supporting the stake. They rarely hold on to moisture very well, as opposed to a moss pole, which holds on to moisture really well, and it gives your roots something to anchor into, typically providing better, healthier growing leaves. So which is right for you, the moss pole or the support pole? Well, it all depends on your style. If you are liking a more hands-off approach, then something like a support pole is fantastic because you can lash your plant to it with something like gardener's velcro or twisty ties, and your plant will feel supported and allow its continued growth. If you want the really big leaves that you see on various other people's plants, you are going to need to look at a moss pole. Moss pole will allow those roots to penetrate, take anchorage in that moss and extract micronutrients from the moss itself, allowing a fuller, bigger, healthier plant. The only pain in the ass part about a moss pole is that you need to keep them moist. Now this takes trial and error to figure out how much moisture it needs, how often you need to fill it up, and there are various ways of actually keeping this moss moist. Personally, I've found this cup with a tiny little pinprick of a hole in the bottom, just allowing the water to drip through, the easiest way, but it does require a little bit of monitoring just to make sure that sphagnum moss is not drying out. There are, of course, other ways of doing this. You can get little spray canisters that you can moisten the poles with, or you can even throw it in the shower when it's time to water your plant. The key takeaway is you want to keep that moss moist all of the time. Not too wet, but don't let it dry out. You can find support stakes like these cocoa coir wrapped ones all over garden centres. They are fairly common. Plant shops, garden centres, they will stock them. If you want something like a moss pole or a DIY job, you are going to have to probably look a little bit harder into actual plant shops or online. These are very much readily available. They are the easiest options to get you started. They come pre-cut. All you have to do is assemble and put some moss in them. Something like a DIY job for a bigger plant, that can be a bit fiddly, but it is more than doable with no experience. You just need some sort of backing. This example is a gutter, a mesh on the front which you can pick up from garden centres, and a cable tie to hold the whole thing together. Fill it full of moss, keep it damp. So a common question that's asked is, do I even need a support pole or a moss pole? No, any plant will be fine without one. However, to get some leaves into a mature state, like a Monstera deliciosa, you really need it to have something that it can anchor to so it can continue its journey. Plants like Epipriniums, like this Cebu Blue, are more than happy just trailing down. However, if you want the big leaves, it is going to need something to go up. Whether that be a support pole or a moss pole, the choice is up to you. How long will my plant take to root into the moss? Well, this varies from climate to climate, growing condition to growing condition, and plant to plant. Something like an Epiprinium Cebu Blue will root a lot quicker into moss than something like a Monstera albo. This is a very slow growing plant. That is a very quick go at growing plant. So how long will my plant take to root into the sphagnum moss? Well, this varies from climate to climate, from plant to plant, from environment to environment. Slower growing plants like this Monstera albo will take root a lot slower than something like the Epiprinium Cebu Blue. Now, when you're attaching your plant to the moss pole, always remember a plant has a front side and a back side. Something with the aerial roots, like this Monstera albo here, the back side is where the roots are going to come out of, and you want them to be as close to the moss pole as you can get it. That way the roots have no trouble finding their way into that moss. Also, a great little tip to remember is when you are watering your moss poles, feel free to add fertilizer to that water as well. Remember, there are roots inside this moss pole, they are also going to want feeding. So remember, if you want the big boy leaves, you're going to need yourself a moss pole or a support stake. See you later.